As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster.
There's no crying in baseball!
I ate his liver with some fava beans. A nice cliente.
That was totally wicked!
If I can change, and you can change, everybody can change!
And welcome to another episode of Your Next Favorite Movie. I'm your host, Josh G. And today I have probably returning for the sixth time, I think. Please welcome back to the show, Anthony Brownlee.
Hey, what's going on?
Not too much on my side. How you been lately?
Keeping that horror spirit going, man.
That is true, and we're going to keep that going today. But before we get into the movie, last time we talked, we were able to just barely give any details about the documentary you were working on by the name of FredHeads.
Mm-hmm.
But now it is out, it is released, it is on streaming. So why don't you tell everybody a little bit about what FredHeads is about?
FredHeads is all about the fandom of A Nightmare on Elm Street. So we've already had, documentaries in the past that dealt with, the actors and, directors and the behind the scenes and, things like that for the actual movies. But we knew it's like the fandom that kept the movies alive. So it's, so we wanted to get in touch with as many fans as we could for this, not just in the States, but overseas. So people would send us videos and they would just tell us their stories. Because we all have stories, it's a lot of us became friends because we were, fans of A Nightmare on Elm Street. And we just wanted to hear how it affected everyone else's lives, from the first time they saw it up till, now, for a lot of people, it's been, 20, 30, years later, so it's all about that fandom, not just Nightmare, but kind of like the horror community as a whole and what that particular community has done for everyone.
And obviously you're one of the main five that is sitting around the table, but what is your official title with this documentary?
Executive producer.
Okay. That's part I wasn't sure of, because just so I don't know what order these are going to come out or anything like that yet, but we will also be having Paige and Kim, who are the co-directors on this thing. All right, so I think it's important you mentioned the fandom, because I saw when I did my review on Letterboxd, I saw a lot of people saying, "Oh, I didn't learn anything new about the franchise," and I'm like, you kind of missed the point. It's not what it's about. It's not.
Right?
It's not about the franchise itself. Look, you're not going to beat Never Sleep Again. Let's be honest.
Yeah, that was an epic,
Yes.
documentary on the actual films
Right.
itself.
Exactly. So this one kind of reminded me of, if you're a Monster Squad fan, Wolfman's Got Nards, because that's also a lot about the fandom of the movie and not the movie itself. So just know that going in. So tell everybody how they can get this or how they can watch it.
FredHeads is available as physical media, DVD on Amazon. It's on Prime Video and is now recently on Tubi.
And if you need a free option, Tubi is the way to go, and you're still helping support, because boy, Tubi has everything.
Absolutely. It's like, to me, Tubi's like this generation's like Monster Vision and like USA Up All Night. Like so many old school, stuff on there.
Yeah, that's a good correlation. I like that. So we haven't talked about this in a while. Where are you at because you are also an author, where are you at on the latest book? What's the latest book news?
Well, I finished my 10th novel last year, Fear of Silence, the huge epic that took 5 years.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, I think last time we talked, you were in the process of getting a cover made.
yes, that cover is officially done. Shout out to Connor, out there in Ireland, actually.
Wow.
Did it for me. Yeah, we met on Twitter, and he, I does commission drawings, and I just had this in mind, and he decked it out for me exactly the way I wanted it. So that part of it is done. The only challenging part now is trying to get that bad boy published, because it is so long, and books that are long like that have a unless you were like an established, well-known named author, you have a tough time getting those particular books published. What I've been learning so far. So it's been a
Okay.
challenge. So as of now, it's still not published. Still working on it. But I promise you, I will get that book out somehow. And working on my 11th book now. It's called the 35th anniversary of Nightmare at Midnight, which is basically a book about. So it's actually a drama about a horror movie that I created. So it's not a real horror movie, but it kind of dealt with me and my journey at the convention. So I've been, doing conventions for almost 14 years. I'm sorry, 17 years.
Oh wow.
And yeah, and when I first started, conventions were very underground. You really had to be a horror fan to know about them, and you wanted to know all about, as many actors as you could, but some names hadn't been dropped in so many years. You ask, well, where's this person ever been? And it's like, well, since they did that movie back in '86, nobody's really heard from them. And, as time went on, I mean, now they're getting people like Sandy Johnson, who was, played Judith Myers. That was her main thing really she's ever done. And it's like nobody would ever think, even she didn't think at first that, people wanted her autograph because she was in the movie for a short amount of time. So it's basically showing like how movies basically become this entity all of its own, and just how much it's loved, and how the actors that did them so many years ago don't realize, and
Yeah.
how that progressed over the years. So that's what this new book is about. So I think a lot of fans can maybe appreciate that.
Yeah, that is definitely a story you hear a lot about these people who are like, well, I didn't think anybody would want to talk to me. I was in a movie for 5 minutes, but those people end up with the biggest lines because they're not
Right.
out there that
Right.
often. So
Hmm.
yeah, yeah, and horror is special in that way. You don't see this type of stuff for other genres. I mean, sci-fi has their own as well, I guess. But
Yeah. Yes.
and I think romantic movies are starting to get that. I think there's like Hallmark conventions and stuff nowadays, though.
There actually is. Me and my me and Jeremy were actually going to go to one time, but not not for the Hallmark aspect, but because there was like a few people who have been in like some of the stuff we loved back in the '90s, like Are You Afraid of the Dark and things like that.
Oh,
And we were
yes.
like had our Are You Afraid of the Dark posters ready to go. I'm sure we didn't actually end up making it to that, which was kind of a bummer, but I guarantee we would have been the only ones there with our '90s snicks, Are You Afraid of the Dark posters.
Yeah, but that's always the cool thing when you're getting the stuff that no one else is getting signed, right?
Right. I'm sure they would have been like surprised, like looking at us like, oh, really?
Yeah,
Really?
I was just talking to some friends, and Vanessa Shaw is coming to Dragon Con. Looks like they're doing a Hocus Pocus reunion.
Oh, nice.
And I'm like, it'd be hard for me not to get something Hocus Pocus signed, but I kind of want to take something Ladybugs and have her sign it because no one's going to be bringing that. And I loved Ladybugs as a kid.
Oh, I love that movie. That was Rodney Dangerfield, man. That movie was amazing. I love that
Exactly.
movie.
And she's
It's
in
so
that.
fun.
So,
Right? That's so fun. Oh man. That's the other reason I wish Jonathan Brandis was still here, man. That would have been like
yeah.
amazing. He was like still one of my like favorite actors.
Yeah, I'm one of those weird people that still actually like Never Ending Story Part 2. So,
I love that movie. Like, come
oh,
on,
really? It gets a lot of
man.
hate out there. So,
Really? I didn't
oh,
even
yeah.
think that. Oh
Oh, it,
wow.
it does. It does.
Gee.
If you don't know
I
that, don't go looking it up. You'll be disappointed. So,
Oh well, I've always liked this, and he's on HBO all the time. So
exactly. That's how I watched it a ton. Yep. Exactly right. All right. So, we're getting to another one from our childhood. And this should be fun to talk about. Going back to 1995, we're going to be discussing Tales from the Hood.
Let's roll, man.
In this neighborhood is a house where souls never rest. You're invited to share their tales.
I kill one of you. I kill you all.
Tales of madness, of revenge, of horror. A powerhouse of a movie and one of the best horror films of the decade. Tales from the Hood. Chew or be chewed.
I don't need to be hearing this, man.
Rated R.
oh yeah. Ooh.
Well, I can't wait to hear this because I have at least a decent story of seeing it, but I can't wait to hear about your first time viewing.
Oh man, that was whew, how many years that been now?
8.
28 years.
Yeah.
Oh man, I was probably like 9 or so, 9 or 10. Because I actually did not get to see it at the movies. That was just one, just obviously didn't get to see it at the movies. But as we were talking before, HBO just always had the movies. So that's actually how I saw it for the first time was on HBO.
Okay.
Um, I was actually at my grandparents' house because my grandparents they were always cool about watching horror movies, especially my grandmother. We always watched horror movies together, and I just remember that one coming on, and when I first saw it, it just kind of threw me because when it said Tales from the Hood, all I'd known at that point was Tales from the Crypt. So I was
Right.
like, huh, it said Tales from the Hood, like it's kind of like what's that, So, so I'm thinking it's going to be something like that. Yeah, for some reason, I'm thinking the Crypt Keeper is going to pop up because it was just, the title was so similar. And, I was in for, definitely a different kind of awakening with this movie. It was just watching it, it just kind of blew my mind, even as a kid, because it was so raw and so, real. And, even though I was like, 9, 10 years old, I would hear about some of these stories that some of these characters were going through, like because this movie deals with a lot of racism, on
Yeah.
top of the horror. And I'd heard those stories from like older relatives, and sadly had dealt with some of it myself, being a kid. Me and my cousins were actually taunted by like some skinheads. Maybe
Ooh.
they were about 19, 20, 21 year olds when we were on like 11. So it kind of hit, so there was fear definitely just because of what was shown in the film, but it was like another type of fear because it's like
Real
this has
life
kind of
horror.
happened to us,
Yeah.
me and some of my family before. So
Yeah,
I was
I
really
figured we
drawn
were
to
gonna
it.
get into some personal stories with this one.
Oh yeah.
And I think this one is gonna be one I'm gonna have to put on the spoiler warning because I think we're gonna have to really discuss this one and not
Hmm.
because of it just because of its nature being an anthology. You can't really describe it without going into the stories. But
Right.
before we get there, I just wanted to tell real quick that I also caught this on HBO, but I did not have parents that liked horror. They let me watch it for the most part, but for some reason they thought this one was going to be too bad for me for whatever reason. And I don't know how I managed to do this, but I remember convincing my stepmom that this movie would basically be like a good message for me to not do drugs if she let me watch it. And and I got that to work because I ended up being allowed to watch it from that.
That's amazing.
So I don't even know how I finagled that, but I remember doing that as basically an anti-drug movie because I guess because I saw a preview and realized the whole thing is that the guys are going for drugs.
Right.
That's the only thing I can go with. I don't know.
Wow. That's
Yeah, it's a weird way to get to watch it, but yes. And then I caught it a lot and watched it a lot and owned it on the
yeah.
old snapback DVD case, the snap
Hmm.
case. And then, of course, now I own the Screen Factory Collector's Edition. But
Oh yeah, had to get that because I had a
yeah,
bootleg for years.
I did not have a bootleg. I think the first time I owned it was on the Snapcase DVD because
I think
that was a legit release.
right. And I think every time I tried to find that it was like out of print or one I think I saw it was like super expensive and
Okay.
I yeah, and I ended up like how if they aren't out for a while,
Right.
a movie that should be like less than 20, it's registering as like 89.99 on Amazon.
Yeah.
I'm just like, oh, like can't justify buying
That,
this film for like
no,
90
that, yeah.
bucks.
When they get like that, it's hard. It was one of my early DVD buys, though, because I was like, I have to have my Tales from the Hood because
Right.
I love this damn thing. So, all right, let's talk about it. Let's get into, and I guess, like I said, we're going to have to go into spoiler territory to talk about these because it's the wraparound and what, 4 stories? I have that right? Four
Wrap around
stories?
it. Yeah, you
It's four.
gotta. Yeah.
4 stories. All right. So I guess tell us how it gets started. Let's start with the beginning. So I guess that's the wraparound story.
With them just, you got your four, not your four, but your three,
Yes.
kind of like, thugs, who are basically looking for drugs. Go to this mortuary where they meet the zaniest mortician I've ever seen in my life as a kid when I first saw that. Like, I think that was my first introduction to Clarence Williams the third. Like, I think that was the first thing I'd ever seen him in, and just watching him in this, it was just like he was just like, I mean, that smile he would give, and he had that gap in his teeth, and there
Yeah.
was just something as a kid, he scared me. Like, he just, I mean, I don't know, just his actions and just the
Right.
way he, I mean, in his famous line, like, we got to get the shit.
The shit.
Oh, the shit. Like, I mean, that's like classic. Like, if I had ever gotten the chance to meet him, that would have been what I would have him sign. Like,
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
anything
Absolutely.
else above all. Like, and, these thugs, they, as they're going through this, old house, with all these bodies in it, they're learning all these stories. And then, one by one, and then that first one with the cops, each one had a different name. I think the first one, well, the wraparound is called Welcome to My Mortuary,
Right.
which, and then Rogue Cop Revelation is the actual first story, which
Um.
is,
Yeah. I kind of just came up with names for myself because I never knew what they were called.
oh,
So I just called it. Let me see. I think I called it Good Cop, Bad Cop. Um.
well, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
I kept it simple because I was young. I just came up with my own. The second one, oh, I had monster in the title. Uh, I can't remember now. Something monster. And then I just called the third one the politician and the doll. Yeah, yeah. And then the last one I always just call Crazy K because it always just stuck out to me that his name was Crazy K
Crazy
for some
K.
reason.
Oh man.
Actually, when I was little, I used to think even though it clearly says Crazy K, I always in my head thought of him as Special K. I think because of the cereal.
Like, that's what I'm saying, like the cereal. Oh man. So many, oh yeah. Each story, man, yeah, it's so good. It's so good. And like that first one, I mean, one thing I always say about this film, it definitely kind of fits into what's happening today.
That
You
that
know,
is that is the thing about it is that this film was relevant in 95 and it's almost more relevant today, and that is a
yeah,
scary thing, honestly.
yeah, yeah. It really is. And so especially that first story, the road
Yeah.
cop revelation, just, and this one was actually an innocent black man just being beat, by these cops because he was trying to get drugs. A politician was trying to get drugs out of his community, and they were basically distributing drugs. They were bad cops,
Yep. They were
and
making money off of it.
then they basically killed him, and left drugs in the car that they drove him off in into that embankment, and basically ruined his name. So
Yep.
what he was fighting for, people thought in the end how he died that he was doing that. And it's like, that's like one of the worst things, and it was a tragic story, but then, it has that huge revenge plot, and it takes a super dark turn. That's like karma times 1,000 in like the worst way possible.
Right. Because, like you said, there's a rookie cop there, and of course, he's the only black cop with him. The
Right.
other three are white cops, and it drives him to a point he can't. He quits the job, and I
Hmm.
think it's like what the 1 year anniversary,
Yeah,
and
one year
he's
later.
having constant nightmares though about this guy. And the 1 year anniversary, he summons him, and he takes the cops back to the graveyard, and then he makes his return.
Exactly. And that freaked me out too as a kid because the way they made him look. I mean, because
Right.
he's supposed to be like kind of decomposed. You can see like the bones under his skin, and his
Yep.
eyes are like that crazy color, and like his voice like had that rat. Ugh, oh, it's like giving me chills now. Just like thinking about it. It's just like so. It's like that's. I mean, this film had. It was like creepy in another way because this wasn't like because this isn't a slasher movie. None of these stories are slasher stories. Like but they take real. It's one thing I love about what people can do with horrors when they take like ideas that people don't necessarily look at as horror, like like depression, anxiety, loss, poverty, um, grief, or sadness, or even mental health, and like, but they can kind of flip it and turn it into this, really dark horror element. And like to me, that's what this film did. It took like different aspects that you know certain, or I guess certain ethnic groups deal with,
Right. Right.
and turned it into this horror or horror stories. And that's what I mean. That part of it obviously didn't really hit me till I got much older, and being a writer, because when you're watching as a kid, you're just watching it, and it's just like it's scary, it's a scary movie. But then as you get older and you become more worldly, and you see different things, and learn different things, certain movies like that start to hit really differently because
Right.
you're watching it with mature eyes now,
Yeah. Yeah, it was different for me as a kid because I was watching it, obviously, and I'm from the perspective of a white guy, so this stuff didn't affect me. And in my mind, this stuff didn't happen because I grew up in a very mixed neighborhood and we all just played together and it
Right,
wasn't a big deal.
right.
So I never really thought of it as real until I got older. you know,
Hmm.
I mean, it's a
Yeah,
hard thing to accept.
yeah. That's the thing about innocence. When it's lost because it's, as they say, that's one of the things we're like a gift that we're like born with and get to have. And then when it's gone, it's like it's gone, and
Yeah.
it's kind of a sad thing. And then, I mean, that's really what I mean, because that's what even with me growing up, like we grew up in like mixed neighborhoods, like, different mixed schools, like, we played with each other, didn't matter, but then there'd be random things where somebody would, you know, or situation would happen, and it's like it made you very much aware of who you are, you know, in those moments. And it was just kind of like, oh, you know, huh, being younger, like I said, it hits you in a certain way, but then as you get older, it hits in a really deeper way, So I think that's what, especially that first story, because you would hear a lot of that stuff, even as a kid, hear a lot about that stuff on the news and in the papers, or from family members or neighbors, So those stories really still hit, back then.
All right, Anthony, why don't you tell us a little bit about how this second story goes?
This one actually takes, an old tale of abuse
The abusive
and
stepfather to be in.
abusive stepfather, and which kind of hits home for me. I wasn't abused,
Okay.
but yeah, just
I
make
was
that
like,
clear real quick. Yeah, make that clear to everybody. No, I was not abused, but I was bullied growing up a lot. And the young kid Walter, he's getting abused at home by his stepfather, but he's getting abused at school,
school as well, yes.
by a bully. And he has this thing where a young girl told him in his class, if you draw the images of what's bothering you, and then you destroy the image, you can kind of defeat you know that thing, which was such a cool concept. And then you start realizing it's really happening with him. Like he like basically crumbles up the picture of the bully, and then like moments later you're like hearing the boy scream, and then like the ambulance is there, and like all his bones are like his both arms and both legs are broken.
Yeah.
And the teacher just like, what happened? He just like just kind of collapsed. He's like, how do you break all four limbs just falling down? I think his excuse is that he had weak bones or something.
Yeah, yeah. Boy must have had weak
Weak
bones.
bones.
He didn't drink his milk, I guess.
It's like not quite.
Yeah, yeah, no.
Yes. So this one, yeah, definitely like so it hit, like I said, just hit in a different way. But I did have step parents. I had a stepmom and a stepfather. Um,
Yeah, I did as
I
well.
honestly didn't care for both, but I would say more so the stepmom. There was like some really, really tough times with that going on because that actually affected my relationship with my real father.
Hmm.
Um, and our relationship never like really, I'll say, got to the potential it should have gotten, sort of because of that. Actually, I blame both of them. Actually, stepmom and dad. But and honestly, I put more, even though she was horrible, I actually put more blame on my dad because that was my dad.
Right.
So and it just seemed like because she would lie on me. She would just say all this stuff and just I'm like a 7-year-old kid, like
Hmm.
so and she had a son that she brought to the marriage. He was a few years older than I was, but and the thing is, like, so when my dad remarried, he remarried a white woman, so I had a white stepmother and a white stepbrother. So so you had that blend, going on, and me and him always got along, cool, you know. But I don't know, she just always had a problem with me whenever I came to visit. So with that aspect, I can kind of get on board and understanding with the bullying aspect,
Right.
of just having like a step parent and then a bully, and then there's those relationships, you know, not being like the best at all. So
But David Allen Greer gives a great performance in this. Not used to him doing serious stuff, but he plays the abusive stepfather, and
man, and he like played the role like good
yeah,
cause this is like 95, so he's like literally just coming off in Living Color, and like that's what I literally just,
right.
and actually I think I seen him in Jumanji too, like before I even saw, so still some comedy stuff, and
Oh,
then
I
like
saw him in Blank Man.
this I'll be a Black Man, yeah, and then just to go to this, it was just like a complete 180, and like just to see his range in that, I mean in that whole like that build up, because you're being told through Walter like, no, this monster's in his house. That's all he's saying. He's like, the monster's back, the monster's in
Right.
my house. He's the one that's hurting me. And so the adults are just kind of like, monster, like, what do and then like, and you see the way his character is. I mean, when the teacher's trying to talk to him about Walter being afraid of some monster, and just the look, I don't know if you really noticed the look on like David Allen Greer's face, like the character, like it's kind of haunting. It's like what he does with his eyes. And I remember that even as a kid. It's just something about the way he would just move, and and like for some reason, because I was thinking like he really was some kind of like a monster that we just like, that only Walter like saw. But it wasn't until I was older, it was like he just saw him as a monster because of
Yeah.
what he did. So in Walter's mind, that's what he was. He was this monster
Right.
that Walter as a kid had created in his mind because of the abuse he was going through. But as a kid, I was thinking the guy really was a monster.
Like he actually would turn into a
He would
monster.
actually
Right.
turn
Right.
into a monster, but that's just the way that Walter saw him as a kid. That was the only way his young mind could process it.
He could process the fact that another human would do this to him. Right.
Right. And like I said, just being a kid, you just don't get that at that point. But as older, you're just like, and it's funny how things just hit you when you're older. You're like, oh, like that's what it was doing, or that's what it was saying. And then just hit you like all of a sudden, just like when you like turned it on for like the 20th time, and then it just finally like finally just gets you. And you know, and just those performances were just like so good, because Rusty Cundy,
Cundiff. Yeah, I
Cundiff,
think I think something like that.
yeah, who was like basically, the director, and I think wrote some of the stories,
Right.
or
Yeah.
co-wrote some of the stories, and that part of the teacher, like he did so good,
Yeah.
like in that role.
Yeah, I think it was what's his partner's name? Darren. I want to say Darren Sharper, but I'm pretty sure that's a football player. I do not think it's actually Darren Sharp. I think it's Darren Scott, maybe. Darren
Darren
Scott
Scott.
sounds
I think
right.
it is. Yeah, I think it is Darren Scott.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, they did. Yeah, I think they both had a hand in writing it. I think Rusty was like the actual director, if I'm not mistaken.
You probably right. I know they pretty much worked together on the whole project. So
Right. And yeah, he did so good in that role as the teacher. And then Paula J. Parker is, you know, uh Walter's mom, and her coming off of Friday, she playing like the most ghetto girl I've ever seen in my life. This in this comedic part, and then she's playing this not just Walter being abused, but she gets like severely beaten up by, I mean, he like beats her with a belt and like punches her, slaps her, and just see that blood just like gushing out of her mouth. And it was just like, that's what I mean by this movie was just so raw and real. It's like they didn't cut away from that stuff, they just really just like threw it like right in your face.
yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. And I think they played it smart because like the first one you have to deal with the racism, and that really happens. But the second one
Hmm.
is domestic horror, inside the
Yeah.
house of a
Right.
family.
Hmm.
So they didn't just go down that same trope that they could have. They could have made because we're about to get in the next story, and that deals with racism again. And then the final story is not. So they evened it out, and I think that's good because
Right.
that makes it watchable for people. Because if every story was about racism, I think white people would be like, "I'm not watching this. That's all it is." But it's
Right.
not that. And I still think there are people who probably say that about this movie, and it's not because they haven't actually watched it.
Yeah. And it's like different kinds, like so in the first one it was about police brutality,
Right.
in this one, and then in the third story it's more about old school racism,
Yep.
back in slavery times, even though it's modern, and story wise it's modern day, you know so it's like different types. So it's like kind of like the now and then like what came before, and they both kind of like dealt with karma in a sense.
Yeah. Oh
uh,
well. I mean, in a way, this is like an extended, long version of Tales from the Crypt, where everybody in the end gets theirs. I mean,
yeah.
that's the premise behind Tales from the Crypt every episode as well.
Oh yeah.
They're gonna get theirs in the end, and this kind of works out that way.
Oh, I loved it when David Allen Greer got his. That was I mean, that he was about to hit her with that pan, and then Walter just takes that picture, and you just hear that that slice when he just like bends the arm back, and he just,
Yeah.
oh man, like every part of his body was just getting like just wrecked, and like just takes the picture and just like spins it and like crushes it. And you just see his
Yeah.
whole body just spinning, and it's just like, oh,
Yeah. He's just a pile of clothes.
probably. And he was still
Well, he still
talking,
had a head at first. He did still have a head until
right.
they burned him. That's right.
But he was still like talking all that craziness. Talking, he said, "This shit ain't over yet, bitch." And it's like, bro, you're like a pile of clothes, like completely melted down, and you're still like, like talking all that. Like it was crazy. But yeah, I mean that was the only way you can get rid of. I always say I always think that's just a cool way, because I always say like when you're dealing with something. Well, even though his character wasn't technically like supernatural, but I always like when I think about supernatural characters, I always say the things that get them, because people always try to shoot them and they can fight through bullets, or they stab them and it might slow them down, but they still coming. But I always say what will never fail is a natural element. A natural element will always wipe out, whether they're real or they're supernatural. Especially fire.
Right.
So I always think that was like kind of like a cool way to like kind of like finish his character off.
Well, you got to wonder how did they explain that? Because he's just kind of like, yeah, we'll take care of it. And I'm like, I don't know. He's coming home in like a suit and tie, so this guy obviously has some kind of job.
Right.
I guess maybe he just up and left the family, and and you don't know where he went. I guess that's
It's
how you
like,
explain it away.
like, yeah, we haven't heard from him in a while.
He came home, had one of his anger fits, and left us.
Wild.
All right, and that brings us to the next story, the one I call Politician and the Doll. What's the actual name? You've been having all the names.
Actual name is KKK Comeuppance.
Oh, jeez. Oh, wow. I mean, it fits. Don't get me wrong, it works, but oh, what a
Oh
name.
yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, when you have like this guy who was literally a former Klan member who's running for like, I think, is he running for like mayor? I believe it is.
I think so. I think that's what it is. Yeah, I think it's mayor.
And he like decides to like reside in like this old historic house that, where slaves were like owned, and like some were like where some had died, and like, so people who like lived in that community were like
Yeah,
very upset, which, understandably so.
right. It's an old plantation house.
Yeah, that's right. And yeah, I mean, stuff like that just has, so much, dark history. And I mean, you see it, and it literally comes to life in this story. And this one, I always say this story, like, technically the last one is my favorite, but to me, this one is the most haunting. Is the KKK comeuppance, like from everything, just the imagery of the dolls, and like, how the souls of the slaves are in these dolls and they're coming back to life, and the the score itself, it's very, I call it like I call it like Southern haunt, like in a sense, like if you listen to that opening, it's just like piano keys that, and oh, it gives you chills, because I like, I've told you before how I collect scores, and
Yep.
it wasn't until
Yep.
I like bought them and like really could isolate them within my headphones and just really could hear them. It's like that score for that one is very haunting. Like it's like probably my favorite score of the whole movie is that one.
So, yeah, there's this painting on the wall, and I guess there's this lore about the plantation house or whatever, but he starts to notice that the pictures, well, it starts with one. The
Hmm.
main little guy sitting on the grandmother's lap, I guess grandmother, I don't really know how these work because they're her dolls, but sitting on the lap disappears and it attacks him. Well,
Hmm.
actually, it attacks his guy because it's it's one of those things, like it's mind-boggling, but it exists. Like it's this white racist politician, but I don't know, in my mind, I call him a hype man. I don't know what to call this guy that's trying to prepare him how to do this campaign. Yeah, I guess a campaign
Right.
leader, I guess is what it is. But he is a black man, but this guy openly talks racist and the guy just accepts it. And you're like, and I get it, it's his job, but I don't know. You gotta it's hard. It's hard to talk about because there's a line there, but he doesn't want to lose his job. And I'm positive this stuff's still happening today. Because
Yeah.
really,
Yeah.
watching this, I mean, there's no way you can't think of, president we had not that long ago. You
Hmm.
can't not make that correlation when you
Yeah.
watch this.
Definitely. Yeah. Especially now. That's what I mean. Like a lot of these stories fit into like, what's going on now,
Right.
which is like so crazy.
And I don't know that it's just happening that much more now versus we just have that much more access to know about it now, and that it was always happening. Know what I mean?
I think it Honestly, I think it's just more access because it's never stopped.
Right.
It's just more like I said, we just have more. I mean, there's cell phones now.
Exactly. There's
There's
people
just
catching this in ways they couldn't get it before,
right.
and it was
And there's
all about your work.
so many more communities now for,
Yeah.
things, and everything's very much open, and everybody has the story. And I think that's the biggest, because back in the day, you know, people didn't have much of a voice, or if they did have a voice, they'd be, punished for it, or something could happen to them. So, they just kind of kept to their own, kept to themselves, for a short time. That was up until like, civil rights started,
Right.
and then it became very much vocalized. And I mean, you can even go back to the whole, Rodney King thing. That was
Yep.
one of the first times it was ever caught. And, this was on like that was an old school, like, handheld, camcorder,
Right.
and it was something that you saw, like, yeah, he was literally getting brutalized by four cops. There was no questions about it. He was unarmed and was just being brutalized, but they weren't punished,
Oh
so,
yeah, that's definitely where that first story came from. I mean, you knew that was
right,
directly inspired by the Rodney King incident.
right. Because by this point in time, it had only been a few years,
Exactly.
since
So
it
it was
was
very
happening.
relevant
So,
with that one.
right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, a lot of that stuff. I mean, there's just what they say, life imitating art, or art imitating life, or vice versa.
Right.
That's real. Like that's, I mean, this story, like this one, like it hits the hardest. You know, like I said, a lot of these stories have so much like of a revenge connotation to them. The revenge of the politician in the beginning had to come back, and then
Right.
Walter getting revenge on his stepfather. And then this third story, old slaves getting revenge.
Yep.
It's just so it's very dark, very dark. Like I said, because they're just using like real elements.
Yeah. Yep.
And to me, that it's scarier. I think that's what makes this film scarier, is because of those elements.
Right. Yep. Because when you look at the big picture, this particular story, I can't say I'm too afraid that these little dolls are going to come off a painting in the wall and come attack me. Like in
Right.
in the literal sense, that's not a thing that I'm worried that's going to happen. But right, it's what it's representing.
Right.
Although I gotta say, this one was always the most. And I figure at the end, I was just going to throw in there that we probably put these in a ranking of how we think of them as our favorites or whatever. This one was always the one that entertained me the most. I think because I liked the little dolls that were doing the
Hmm.
killing, though. And it was bloody.
Oh yeah, when they, yeah, those, and like I said, there was a lot of crazy imagery in this one, especially when, like I said, that early scene when his hype man, was trying to explain to him what to say, and then he, ends up slipping back down the stairs, and
Right.
you later on you realize it's kind of like the the entity of the house itself, and then like when he goes back to watch the video when it happens, and he doesn't notice that doll is just sitting there that whole time.
Right.
And then he goes back, and it's like that's like, oh, that moment is just like, whew, like it's one of those things that just makes your skin crawl, like holy crap. Because then that's when he starts to actually freak out. Duke Medgar, that's what it was, Duke Medgar, the
Oh,
guy,
yeah. Yep.
the character
What a
who
name.
actually, who was the dentist as well.
It was years before I put that together, too.
Oh, that was him?
I knew Corbin Burnson, but I never put together that was the guy who played the dentist because of that blonde hair he's got in
Oh
this.
yeah, they put that wig on him.
It was years before it was like one of those things you were talking about, like after so many viewings, all of a sudden one day it just comes together and you're like, wait a minute. Because I grew up watching The Dentist and I never ever put
Yep.
those two together that they were the same person.
And I actually got to meet him in person at a con. And of course, the first thing I asked him about is Tales from the Hood.
Okay.
Before I even talk about that, I'm like, man, how was it like? I said, how's it like working on Tales? And this is probably like my second con I like had even gone to. And like, I was like, how was it like working on it? He said that the part was, it was good in the sense of like, this was something new that he was doing, and with the subject matter, because he said pretty much everybody on the set, like with the grips and everybody was pretty much black on that set, and he said he felt so uncomfortable at times because his character was
Yep.
just like this hardcore racist, and he had to say like stuff that he like wouldn't say like in real life.
Right.
And he's like, he was just like, he said he would cringe so much that he just had to say it. And then, they were reassurance, like, we wrote this, like, we want you to be that guy. Like,
Yeah.
you have to represent that guy, And I said,
Yeah.
and I just like, I didn't think about it like that from that aspect of him having to, to do that.
Right. I mean, it's better than him coming on set and it just kind of rolls out and you're like, oh, this guy's used to this. I mean, that would be really bad. Yeah. Oh, that would be horrible.
Oh man. Yeah, and then like just meeting him in real life, he's like this really cool, laid back guy. I mean, he was wearing like a Bob Marley shirt, and I was like, oh man,
Oh,
like
yeah.
this guy's like cool as hell, like and it was just it was just a really cool experience just to get like to just be able to talk to him about it,
Yeah.
you know.
Didn't he go on to like do Law and Order for like 10 years or something? Didn't he do that?
Did he?
I feel like he
But was it
was
Law and Order? Or it might have been another other
something
like
like that. Because I
what's it
feel
called?
like
Like family law or martial law or it was something like that. Something law. Now I don't think it was Law and Order, but it was something law.
oh, okay, it wasn't Law. I thought he went on to do Law and Order. I could be wrong.
I thought I can't think of it. Yeah, something law. One of those old school lawyer shows.
Good Lord, he's done so much since that's been done. I can't even find
Oh
it.
yeah, he's done. Yeah, I mean, he comes from like acting family. Like his mom was like she was like one of the major players in like Young and the Restless.
But I'm not even at the old stuff. I'm at the newer stuff, and he's still done so much. I'm just now at 2012, and I'm working from yeah. He has 255 credits.
Wow,
Yeah,
man, wasn't even acting since he was a kid. I don't even.
I mean a lot of them are now. Like he's. I was wrong because I'm not seeing this at all. There it is. No, that's one episode. That wouldn't be it. He was on Law and Order, but it was one episode, so that's not going to be it. That's not what I'm thinking of. I wouldn't remember that
Right.
because I didn't even watch it. L.A. Law. So that you were
LA.
right.
Okay,
L.A.
LA
Law.
law.
That
Okay.
okay. I was
I knew
like,
it was something. Yeah, I knew it was something law. I just couldn't remember. Yeah, I don't know why I was thinking martial law, but I knew it was something like that.
yeah, martial law is like that old '80s action flick with oh my god, Cynthia Rothrock.
Oh,
Jeez,
okay.
yeah, that one. I was like, I know it, and then it escaped my mind. Yeah, that's one Cynthia Rothrock. All right, I gotta admit, you said this is your favorite. This was always my least favorite as a kid, and that's this last story. So I want you to talk about why it's your favorite because I'm curious about this one with you.
Well, this one, which is hardcore convert,
Okay,
which is opposed to Crazy K,
Crazy K.
which is like the main character, Crazy K. What really got me, well, first of all, is because it stars Rosalind Cash, who I've always loved Rosalind Cash. Like she's been in a lot of like 70s, horror, and she was, acted with Vincent Price in horror, and I just always loved her. She was just always such a cool actress to me because she actually like died, I think, a year after filming this,
Mm.
unfortunately. She had like cancer,
So
but she
you
was
knew
still
her before this?
like, yeah, and other stuff. Yeah, I've
Oh,
seen her in
okay.
like other stuff, and I just always liked her. And like her character, like I said, I didn't realize this until I got older, but her just the whole thing of what they were trying to do to him and like the message it was sending, especially that scene where Crazy K's like, after he's been shot and it's been like 5 years later and he's in prison
Yeah.
and he's supposed to go, to this like real like rehabilitation place, and then he gets put into this like guy who's like a hardcore supremacist,
Right. Yes.
and he tells him like basically you could tell him that he's a killer and like yeah, just like him and all this, and the guy's like calling him these names and stuff, but he's like getting all offended. But he said, but yeah, he said, but all the people you killed, he said, what color were they? And then he just kind of pauses and he just wrote like he's killed only black people,
Yeah.
and this
This
is a
one.
black
Yeah.
man
Right.
that's on that, and and that's like deep, and it's like it's like wow, like that really that hits, you know, and
It
it's like
it definitely hits differently now for me than it did as a kid because I didn't even think about that as a kid. But yeah, I mean that's what this one's about. It's about basically, I mean, it's about black on black crime,
mm-hmm,
which is this whole other thing.
right. And then it goes like even deeper when they actually get into that place and he's seeing all those images, and they strap him to that table. That scene was like so uncomfortable for me just to like watch it because he's just spinning
Yeah, that's
and
true.
he's seeing all those images, like so all the images in color that are like actually moving, that stuff from the movie, but all those black and white pictures that shown are actually real, like photos of people that were actually killed, were murdered, like hung, like hanging from trees or stabbed or whatever it was, like back in like the 40s and 50s, that people had all these pictures of. And like I actually realized that as a kid, and just like I would just watch it. I'm like, those are real people, like that they're showing in these, you know, these situations, and it that like really freaked me out because when you're a kid, you're supposed to TV's fake, or movies are fake, it's not real, but this was real, and and you see his reaction. He's a killer of black men as a black man, but then he's seeing images of when all his people were killed from like having no choices back in the day, and like it was like this crazy contrast of just everything that he was just seeing, and it was wild. And then just Rosalind Cash's character, when she delivered, it's my favorite line of the whole movie while he's spinning, and she's just like, you know, she said, what's wrong, Jerome? She said, you don't like seeing black people get killed, and she said, but isn't that what you've been doing your whole life?
Right.
And then she's just like,
Powerful
she
line.
says, right, right. And then that line right after, she's just like, she's like quoting from, from the Bible. She's like, Cain, was the world's first murderer. He slayed his brother. And then she's like, how many brothers have you slayed? And it's like, I love that line. It's like, I don't know, something about it just, I was like, oh, that line was just like perfect. So it's just so many aspects to this particular story, and then especially at the end when he's in that kind of like quiet room and he's seeing all his victims basically
Yeah.
just talking to him, and you see that little girl.
Yeah, that one will get to you.
Yeah.
What did I do?
Right. He's like, I was just playing in my room and the bullet from your gun came through the wall, and he was just like, and you just see his face just kind of like just drop, like
He's just trying to defend it. Wrong place,
wrong
wrong
time.
time. And I'm like,
Right.
she's in her room playing. That's not the wrong place.
Right.
There's no way to defend being in your room is the wrong place. But
Right.
oh yeah.
And then realizing who she actually was, so in that with that story, what you don't realize is that the entire time, because you're thinking he survived his shooting and everybody else was, killed and he was saved, but really, you don't realize that he is actually gonna die the entire time.
Yep.
The entire time he's gonna die, but she's basically, to me, she's an angel saying, I'm giving you a chance. Because
Right.
I learned that, growing up in church, is that if you repent, you can be forgiven once you repent. And that's what she said, I'm giving you a chance to just admit what you've done and you can be saved. But he was just so consumed with anger and hate that he just couldn't see it. And he just saying those like, I don't give a fuck, I don't give a fuck, I don't give a fuck.
Yeah.
And you could see her at the end just reaching like, no, like Jerome, like no, because she knew she was losing him, because she knew if he didn't, where he was gonna go.
Right.
And I was like, I really realized what that story was, I was like wow, like that, like so that's why it became my favorite. It
Okay.
became my favorite more as I got older. Like I liked it, like I said, I liked it as a kid, but it's like the older I got, the more it topped all the other stories for me, just because of that particular message, and it was because it was just so deep.
All right. So the interesting thing about this last story is that it leads us right back into the wraparound.
Mm-hmm. Which is like nothing that I expected at all. Like this probably had one of the biggest surprise endings of like the 90s.
That's fair because I definitely did not see this coming when the story was happening at all.
Oof, just them, and just everything that you find out that these three guys were the ones that killed Crazy K, and they just assumed the mortician was gonna like snitch on them, and so basically they all beat him a little bit and basically said, we tired of these stories, where's the shit? And that was him going more into his famous line like, the shit, we're gonna get the shit. And so and then he takes them down and they definitely do not find the shit at all.
Oh no, definitely not. He well, his clothes start to rip off and he turns into their version of Satan.
Oh, and he looked like insane. I mean, that was like
Yep.
the scariest version of Satan I think I've ever seen in my life.
It's pretty scary. He also in this point, the shit, I love that line, but he also delivers one of my other favorite lines. It's something I normally say when I'm walking into work. Welcome to hell, motherfuckers.
Oh yeah, when he does it, like his tongue, like that, like real thin tongue, like goes through his gap. He's like
Yeah.
motherfuckers.
Yeah.
It's like it goes through his gap. And he's like rips his and and then he just transformed. And you just hear them screaming, and then that one that was acting like the toughest, like was screaming, like I mean screaming.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
like, and then you just see him just like burning there. I mean, and they're just like, basically burning forever.
Yep.
It's
Turns
just like,
out they've been in hell. They've gone to hell themselves.
and it's crazy. Like they just had that whole time they were dead, like had no idea.
Yeah,
Like,
that would suck. I don't know. That would definitely suck. That'd be a sucky ending. But yeah, that's Tales from the Hood.
man.
It,
And
it's
part of it, I
it's
just didn't get all the way because I was wondering, like, how did they know that they weren't dead? And the fact that because I felt like he would have like taken them like right away, but it's like
he wanted to play with them.
he wanted to play with,
He
yeah,
wanted
like
to
he
toy
wanted
with
to
them. Yeah.
take them through this like journey. Basically, it almost basically showed them like each story, like how it, well, basically how it led other people to be where they were,
Right.
and just basically showed them like what their life was and like why they ended up there. So it's basically almost like a lesson for them randomly, which is like wild.
Yeah, it's one of those things where like it almost makes you wonder. He's telling them these stories. If they had been able to do like Crazy K at the end is trying to get him to repent so that he doesn't end up where he is, had they been able to get that message from one of the stories, would they had a different outcome? But on the other hand, you're already down there with Satan, so I don't think they ever had a chance at a different outcome. So I'm not sure.
Yeah. And that's what they said. That's what he said. He said, after you killed Crazy K, some of his boys killed you. And he was like, I guess you didn't make it.
Yeah. So let's do the fun thing and let's rank these real quick, and then we'll get into some other stuff real quick I want to ask you about. What would you put? What would you put as your bottom spot?
Bottom story. I ooh, man, it's kind of hard because they're all just so good. But I
Oh,
guess
it's
I
not
would
like we
say
don't like any. I mean, look, this
right,
is this
yeah,
is this is a 5-star movie for me. I rate this movie.
right.
I love this beginning to end, wrap around everything.
I would
This is
say probably the probably the first story.
wow, wow. I wasn't expecting that one.
I'm not.
I wasn't expecting that at all. Like, yeah, for me, it's this last story. But just like I said, all these stories are strong. You
Right.
definitely were able to look at it, and actually, you brought me to look at it a little bit differently than I had before. But I still, just out of my preference, this is. I don't know. I don't connect with the character of Jerome that much. Well, not that I'm supposed to,
Right.
but I don't want to connect with any of these characters really, especially to an extent. I guess I shouldn't say not at all, but yeah. All right. So then where do you go?
Probably the second story. Boys get bruised. Or boys do get bruised.
Yep. I think I agree
Um,
with that. I agree with that. That's where I'm at.
then third would definitely be KKK comeuppance. Because that one, like as a kid, that one was probably like I said, that one just even still just like the score and just the actual story for that one is just really just a haunting. It's all around. To me, it's like the scariest story of like all the stories put together.
Okay. I think this is where I put what I called good cop, bad cop. What'd you say it was actually called?
Bad.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it just left my brain. I know it.
I was like, I know you said it earlier in the episodes, but I can't remember it right now.
That was
Uh,
a Road Cop Revelation.
Road Cop Revelation. Okay.
For some reason, see, because you had said for some reason I was thinking like bad cops, and I was like, that's no. I was like,
No, that's
that's not it. That's what he said. And I was just like, no, that's not it. And then it's like that's all of my brain was like popping up was bad cops. So I'm just like, no. I'm like, yeah, it is bad cops, but no, that's not what the story is. Oh, Road Cop Revelation.
okay. Okay.
And then of course my number one is Hardcore Convert. Just
Mine
because
is
of the message.
The Politician and the Doll, and I think I'm sticking with mine. I don't even like saying the actual name of it. Jeez.
Well, I mean, that's what it basically is. He gets
No,
his
it is.
comeuppance.
I did, like I said, it's fitting. It fits the story perfectly. But oh, all right. So this is what I want to ask you: have you seen these sequels that they've done?
Uh, I know they did two more. I know they came
Right.
out with the third one fairly recently, but I've only seen the second one, and I only saw it one time. And I was actually in California when I saw the second one when we were at our Airbnb. We were kind of getting ready, and we just put something on like while we're, while the people at Netflix. And I only
Okay.
like one story out of that whole bunch.
Yeah, it's definitely a drop down, and I'm with you. I only saw the second one, and I've only seen it once, and I'd be lying if I can't even remember the stories at this point. So I don't have. I mean, I think who was it? Keith David came in to be the crypt keeper guy, your host, basically. Is that?
I think so. That sounds familiar.
Yeah, I think Keith David's that one, and I think they got Tony Todd for the third one.
I feel like I might have remembered that. Like I said, I don't think I saw the third, but I feel like I remembered something about him being part of it.
Yeah, that's what I'm. Yeah, like I haven't seen the third one either, so I'm going
Yeah,
off what I think I remember.
yeah. I don't know. Some of those stories in the second one, it was just they were just like outlandish. It didn't have that same feel as like the first one. It's I was like when I was watching, I was like, what? Like because I was really expecting, especially after all that time had passed and like just the different things that have happened in the world, like like what they could have like touched upon. And then like when I actually saw it, it really just threw me, and I was just like, and then what really got me was that it was like some of the same writers and I think the same director, and like so I was kind of like, wow,
Yeah, I think Rusty Cundiff and Darren Scott might both be back on that one. Like the
right.
core team is back, and it's just it doesn't hit nowhere near as hard as that original does.
Mm, it doesn't. And yeah, not because I think I initially thought that somebody else had like taken it and like they had come up with like a sequel, and I was thinking like, because I remember saying like, oh, this isn't the same guys, like this is somebody else, just trying to make a sequel or whatever. And then I found out it was them, and I was like, oh man, and it's like I don't even remember what any of the stories were called. The only one I mean one that like really stuck out that was like really like over the top was when like a giant like a doll came to life, but it was like a giant doll, but it was like a I don't know, it was like some weird doll, like I don't know, it was just like I still just think about like what like I was like scratching my head, just
Yeah,
like what is this? Like I was like I don't get it, you
yeah, and
know?
your memory's working better than mine because I can't even remember that right now. Like I literally
Yeah,
don't remember any of the stories as I think about it. And because of that, I didn't want to watch the third one because I was like, I don't want to be, I don't want this to be tarnished more with this name.
I know that's
Don't
yeah. Oh,
don't use the Tales from the Hood name. It's too damn good. It's
yeah. And the one I actually did like out of that at part two was the last story. Like I don't remember how many stories I don't know if they had three or four, but the last story was about Emmett Till.
Mm,
If you remember, if you kind of remember that, 'cause that's the one that like kind of grabbed me. So that took this approach of like I think if it was like if Emmett Till hadn't been murdered,
oh,
and like how it kind of changed history, like in the present.
right. Wow. That makes me wonder if by that point I just zoned out of that movie because I don't that doesn't even click and that should because that sounds decent.
Yeah, that one was like to me that was like the only decent story, and I thought that was really because it was about a guy from what I'm trying like six. So this has been like almost 5 years since I saw it. So it was
Yeah,
like
probably something
there
like
was
that.
this guy. He was either married or engaged to was a black guy, and he was like engaged or married to a white woman, and they went to I think visit her parents' house, and like they kind of like lived in the South, and I'm not sure how like the history kind of changed, but or if he had read something or did something and like Emmett Till ended up surviving, and like now like the parents were turning against him, and his fiance was like turning against him, and
Hmm.
he was like super lost, like what do you like what's wrong with you guys, like he said we're getting married. She's like I would never marry a black man, and it was just going like just because history had been changed,
Right.
so
Hmm.
things hadn't gone the way that they so it was just like it was really interesting just to see that, like just how kind of like that whole thing with like the butterfly effect, if you
Right.
step on a butterfly in the past and like the future is completely changed. So that was actually a really cool story. I did like that one, but that was the only one out of that entire anthology that I liked.
So I don't know if you gave these any thought or not, because I really don't know how to even approach the questions with that I normally like to cover with an anthology. But as you know, I have the sequel one in there. Did you come up with something as a sequel? Because I don't even know how to do it. That's why I just figured we talk about the sequels instead.
And like, what I would like my take on it would be.
Right. Yeah. That's why I was wondering. I didn't know because an anthology is not something that's you can really do that to. That's the whole point of an anthology.
Right, yeah, it's just like, I mean, all of them, like, typically are supposed to have like some type of message, or at least with this particular, franchise or, these series. So, and I never saw, like I said, I never saw the third one, so I don't even know what they
Yeah.
even touched upon, on that. I mean, it actually could be better than the second one. Honestly, I actually probably will, since we're talking about it, we'll actually go and watch it somehow. I don't know what platform it's on, but might find it just so I could say that I did watch it and see if it, maybe had some better stories than part two. But honestly, I just felt like as long, like for me, if I was doing it, like, keeping those kind of like same themes of, not using like typical things you would find in like a slasher type of movie, but, like, so, like I said, using things like, anxiety and depression and loss and grief and, mental health and, or like, racism, which they, kind of touched on that in some of the newer ones, just using those elements, like I said, that people don't typically think of when they think about a horror movie. I said, as long as, you can keep that as like a good solid foundation, I think for me, that's what I would have done.
Okay.
But, made it, would have kept it obviously in, the modern day, because like actually like what's going on now. You can take it like you can make your own like thing because COVID, happened, or
Yeah.
um the George Floyd thing, happened. That could be like our modern day, like, kind of Emmett Till type of thing,
Yep.
you know, uh, and just how people are like, taking more of a stance now, like how we have more riots going on now. Like, it's like history is like repeating itself, and like now in this day and age, and you could use those elements for like a new anthology, or at least I think so.
Yeah. No. No. I guess let me ask you this: is there someone that you think would make that horror host, that perfect host to lead all these stories? Is there someone out there?
Actually, just because I saw her in like American Horror Story, and just I know she has that power. Like I feel like Angela Bassett would be a cool, kind of switch it up and have it be, a woman this time instead
Yeah.
of, like a man. Because she can make her, like I said, she's like, has so much range and is very dynamic, but she also has that thing where she can, draw fear.
Yep.
Like I said, I saw it in like American Horror Story with her, and like I feel like she could pull it off.
Nope. I agree. As soon as you said American Horror Story, I figured you were going to Angela Bassett because, yeah, no. she was good in those, and the season she was in, the ones I saw. So, yeah. All right. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to give that final pitch on why someone should watch Tales from the Hood if they haven't seen it before.
Well, Tales from the Hood, it's magic. It's pure magic. Like I said before, it's raw, it's real, it's in your face, it's like unapologetic, and still being terrifying at the same time. So it's like if you want to see a different type of movie, to kind of break out of that, norm that you normally follow when you're, watching your horror movies, Tales from the Hood is one of the ones like, in this, I would say, in the last, what's been almost 30 years that still, resonates today, still, hits on things that, you've probably seen in your own life that you don't necessarily want to talk about or, just because it's too hard. But, but being in this horror fashion, I feel like it's a must. I feel like you need to watch it. Just to see another spectrum. Because like I said, I think it's really important. Like I said, and each one has a message, and I think each message is felt like very strongly. And I feel like honestly, no matter what race you are, no matter where you come from, I think in some ways the characters in these stories in some way have like entered your life in some way. Those different like character types in this movie, like it's touched you in some way, whether it was in passing or you were in school, whatever, So that's why I feel like it's important for not just horror fans, but anybody. I feel like anybody.
I agree.
To watch this film, like it's one of those films that should be cataloged. As they put certain movies and say mark it down as importance. In cinematic history, it's one of those ones that I feel like should be in that same realm.
Yeah, no, well said. I agree with all that. I will say you talked about it earlier, but I say if nothing else, just watch it for the Clarence Williams performance.
Right? Yeah.
I mean,
for that alone, absolutely,
absolutely. All right, Anthony, I think that's going to wrap this one up. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find you, whether it's online, find your books, direct them to the documentary again, whatever you want to do.
Yeah, you can always find me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and now you can find me on TikTok. Finally joined the TikTok family. um, and you can also find on any of my platforms, you can always find the links to my books, which will take you to my Amazon page, which will be in my bio. And then FredHeads, you can, as I said, you can find it on Amazon as in DVD format, physical media. If you have Prime Video, and if you have Tubi, those are your ways you can watch and check out FredHeads.
All right, and as always, follow the show at YNF Movie Pod on Twitter. That's where I'm most active, so that's what I always link people to. If you want, you can just go to linktr.ee/YNF Movie Pod. And you can have access to the YouTube channel, my letterbox, where you can see what I'm watching when I'm not being covered on the show. And I will be back next week, and it'll probably be with one of the other people from FredHeads. I don't know what order I'm going to put these out in yet, but we'll talk about FredHeads a little more and one of their favorite movies. So until then, you guys take care, and I will talk to you next time.